The champagne had gone flat hours ago, but Isabella Morgan still held the crystal flute in her trembling hand. She stood in the center of the master bedroom at Sterling Estate, her white gown heavy with pearls and broken dreams. The room was magnificent, all silk curtains and antique furniture, but it felt like a beautiful prison. Cameron Sterling hadn't spoken a word since they'd left the reception. His tall frame moved through the room with controlled precision, removing his tuxedo jacket and loosening his tie. Everything about him screamed wealth and power, from his perfectly tailored clothes to the way he commanded space without effort. His dark hair was slightly disheveled now, and his green eyes held storms that Isabella couldn't begin to understand. She'd met him only 3 times before today. 3 formal meetings where her father, James Morgan, had negotiated her future like a business transaction. Cameron needed a wife to satisfy his dying grandfather's wishes. Her father needed Cameron's investment to save Morgan Industries from bankruptcy. It was simple mathematics, her father had said. 1 daughter plus 1 billionaire equals salvation for an entire family. I suppose you're satisfied with yourself, Cameron finally spoke, his voice cutting through the silence like ice. He didn't look at her, instead focusing on pouring himself a generous measure of scotch from the crystal decanter on the sidebar. Isabella's throat tightened. I don't understand what you mean. He turned then, and the contempt in his eyes made her step backward. Don't play innocent. You and your father executed this perfectly. Trapped me into this marriage with my grandfather's emotions and your family's convenient financial crisis. That's not fair, Isabella protested, finding her voice despite her fear. I didn't ask for any of this. My father made this arrangement, not me. Cameron crossed the room in 3 long strides, stopping just inches from her. He was so close she could smell his cologne, expensive and intoxicating. Fair? Let me tell you what's not fair, Isabella. Having to marry a stranger because my grandfather's heart condition means I can't refuse his dying wish. Being blackmailed by circumstances into giving up my freedom. His words stung more than they should have. Isabella had harbored foolish hopes during the brief courtship. Cameron was devastatingly handsome, successful, and occasionally, when he forgot to be cold, she'd caught glimpses of someone kind underneath. But those glimpses were illusions, she realized now. I'm not asking you to love me, Isabella said quietly, lifting her chin with whatever dignity she could muster. But we made vows today. Can't we at least try to make this work? Cameron laughed, a harsh sound devoid of humor. Make it work? You want to play house and pretend this is some fairy tale? He stepped even closer, and Isabella's breath caught. Despite everything, her body responded to his proximity with an electric awareness she couldn't control. Let me make something very clear, Cameron continued, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. You are my wife on paper only. You'll attend social functions with me, play the devoted spouse for my grandfather and the media, and enjoy all the financial benefits that come with the Sterling name. But in private, we are nothing to each other. Isabella felt tears threatening, but she refused to let them fall. Then why are we standing in this bedroom together? We're not. Cameron moved away abruptly, creating distance between them. Down the hall, 3rd door on the right. That's your room. It's been prepared with everything you could possibly need. You'll sleep there, live there, and stay out of my way. The rejection hit Isabella like a physical blow. Her wedding night, and she was being sent away like an unwanted guest. You're sending me to a guest room? On our wedding night? I'm establishing boundaries, Cameron corrected coldly. Don't confuse this arrangement with a real marriage, Isabella. Your father got his money. You got your family's security. I got shackled to a woman I don't know and don't want. Everyone got what they needed except me. Isabella's temper flared through her hurt. I didn't want this either. Do you think I dreamed of marrying someone who looks at me like I'm garbage? I had plans for my life, Cameron. I wanted to finish my art degree, maybe travel, find someone who actually wanted to be with me. How touching, Cameron said sarcastically. The sacrificial bride. But you made your choice when you walked down that aisle. You chose security over integrity, money over independence. Don't expect me to feel sorry for you. You're wrong about me, Isabella said, her voice shaking with emotion. You don't know anything about me or why I agreed to this. But you've already decided I'm some kind of gold digger, so what's the point in explaining? Cameron studied her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. For a second, Isabella thought she saw something flicker in his eyes, uncertainty perhaps, or regret. But it vanished as quickly as it appeared. You're right. I don't know you, and I don't want to. Now please, leave my room. I have an early morning tomorrow, and this conversation is exhausting. Isabella stood frozen, part of her wanting to fight, to demand better treatment, to refuse to be dismissed so easily. But another part of her, the part that remembered her father's desperate face and her mother's tears, knew she had no choice. She was trapped in this marriage as surely as Cameron was. Without another word, Isabella gathered the heavy train of her wedding dress and walked toward the door. Her hand was on the handle when Cameron spoke again. Isabella. She turned, a tiny spark of hope igniting against her better judgment. Maybe he would apologize. Maybe he would admit this was all wrong and they could start over. Don't make the mistake of falling in love with me, Cameron said, his voice flat and final. I'll never love you back. This is a business arrangement, nothing more. The sooner you accept that, the easier this will be for both of us. Isabella felt something inside her harden. She met his cold gaze with one of her own. Don't worry, Cameron. After tonight, love is the last thing you need to worry about from me. But remember this, you might own my name and my time, but you don't own me. And someday, you're going to regret treating me this way. She left before he could respond, closing the door firmly behind her. The hallway stretched endlessly before her, dimly lit and unwelcoming. Isabella walked slowly, her wedding dress whispering against the polished floors, each step taking her further from the man who was her husband and closer to a room that would become her exile. The guest room was beautiful, she had to admit. Decorated in soft blues and creams, with a four-poster bed and French doors opening onto a private balcony. But it wasn't the master bedroom. It wasn't where a bride should spend her wedding night. Isabella struggled with the endless buttons on her dress, finally managing to free herself from the expensive prison of fabric. She stood in her silk slip, staring at her reflection in the mirror. She looked the same as she had this morning, but everything was different now. She was Mrs. Cameron Sterling, yet she'd never felt more alone. Her hand moved to the necklace hidden beneath her slip, the one piece of jewelry she'd insisted on wearing despite the wedding planner's protests that it clashed with her designer gown. It was an antique locket, silver and worn, with intricate engravings on its surface. Her grandmother, Grace Morgan, had given it to her on her deathbed 3 years ago. Keep this safe, Isabella, her grandmother had whispered, her aged hands pressing the locket into Isabella's palm. It's more important than you know. The truth is inside, but don't open it until the time is right. You'll know when that is. And Isabella, when you meet a man named Sterling, remember that not all debts are financial. At the time, Isabella had thought her grandmother was confused, her mind wandering in those final hours. But now, married to Cameron Sterling, those cryptic words took on new meaning. Isabella opened the locket carefully. Inside was a tiny photograph, faded with age, of a young woman who looked remarkably like Isabella herself. On the opposite side was a photograph of a handsome young man in military uniform. Isabella had studied these photos countless times over the years, wondering who these people were. Her grandmother had never explained, and after she died, Isabella's father had refused to discuss it, claiming he knew nothing about the locket or its contents. But Isabella had done her research. The military uniform was from World War II era. The woman's dress and hairstyle were from the same period. And though the photos were old and faded, Isabella could see something in the young man's eyes that reminded her painfully of Cameron. Isabella woke to sunlight streaming through unfamiliar windows. For a moment, she forgot where she was, then the memories of last night crashed over her like cold water. She was in the guest room of Stirling Estate, rejected by her husband on their wedding night. She forced herself out of bed and found the bathroom stocked with expensive toiletries, thick towels, and a plush robe. Someone had anticipated her needs perfectly, which somehow made everything worse. Cameron had planned this exile down to the smallest detail. After showering, Isabella discovered a walk-in closet filled with clothes in her exact size. Dresses, casual wear, shoes, everything she could possibly need. It was like living in a gilded cage where every comfort was provided except the one thing she wanted: respect. She chose simple jeans and a soft sweater, refusing to dress up for a house where she was treated like an unwelcome guest. As she descended the grand staircase, the smell of fresh coffee and baking bread drew her toward the kitchen. A woman in her 60s stood at the counter, her gray hair pulled back in a practical bun. She wore a crisp uniform and moved with the efficiency of someone who had worked in this house for years. When she noticed Isabella, her expression remained neutral, neither welcoming nor hostile. "Good morning, Mrs. Stirling. I'm Martha Hayes, the head housekeeper. I've prepared breakfast for you in the morning room." "Thank you, Martha. Please, just call me Isabella." Martha's eyebrows lifted slightly. "That wouldn't be proper, Mrs. Stirling. Mr. Cameron is very particular about household protocol." "Of course he is," Isabella muttered, following Martha to a sun-filled room overlooking the gardens. A single-place setting waited at the long table, emphasizing her solitude. "Mr. Cameron took his breakfast at dawn," Martha explained, pouring coffee. "He's in the vineyards now. He usually doesn't return until evening." Isabella nodded, unsurprised. Cameron was already avoiding her. She ate mechanically, barely tasting the perfectly prepared food. When Martha returned to clear the dishes, Isabella made a decision. "Martha, is there a library in this house?" "Yes, Mrs. Stirling. Second floor, west wing. It's quite extensive. The Stirling family has been collecting books for 4 generations. The library was magnificent. Floor-to-ceiling shelves lined 3 walls, filled with leather-bound volumes. A massive fireplace dominated the 4th wall, with comfortable chairs arranged nearby. Large windows offered views of the vineyard rolling into the distance. Isabella ran her fingers along the spines of books, reading titles at random. History, literature, philosophy, agricultural texts about winemaking. Then she noticed a section that looked older than the rest, books with faded spines and cracked leather covers. Her hand stopped on a volume labeled Stirling Family History, 1920 to 1950. She pulled it carefully from the shelf, settling into one of the leather chairs near the window. The book was handwritten, a family chronicle maintained by various Stirling ancestors. She flipped through pages of births, deaths, marriages, and business dealings. Then a name made her freeze: Grace Whitmore. Her grandmother's maiden name. The entry was dated 1944, "My son Thomas has become infatuated with a local girl, Grace Whitmore. She is unsuitable for our family, daughter of a poor shopkeeper. I have forbidden the relationship, but Thomas is rebellious. This war has made young people forget their place in society." Isabella's heart raced. She turned pages frantically, finding more entries about Thomas Stirling and Grace Whitmore. A forbidden love affair between Cameron's grandfather and her grandmother. But the entries stopped abruptly in 1945, with no explanation of what happened. "That's a private family archive." Isabella jumped, nearly dropping the book. Cameron stood in the doorway, still wearing work clothes, dirt on his boots. His expression was unreadable, but his voice held warning. "I was just looking at the library," Isabella said, trying to keep her voice steady. "Martha said it was all right. The main collection is fine. But those particular volumes are family records, not for casual browsing. Cameron walked into the room, and Isabella noticed he looked tired, shadows under his green eyes. "I'm family now," Isabella pointed out, holding the book protectively. "Or does that only apply when it's convenient for you?" Cameron's jaw tightened. "What are you reading?" Isabella hesitated, then decided honesty was her only option. "An entry about your grandfather, Thomas Sterling, and a woman named Grace Whitmore." Something flickered across Cameron's face, surprise mixed with something darker. "What do you know about Grace Whitmore?" "She was my grandmother," Isabella said quietly. "She died 3 years ago." The silence that followed was deafening. Cameron stared at her, his expression shifting from shock to confusion to something like anger. He crossed the room in quick strides and took the book from her hands, scanning the page she'd been reading. "Your grandmother," he repeated slowly. "Grace Whitmore was your grandmother?" "Yes. She married my grandfather, Henry Morgan, in 1946. But before that, it seems she knew your grandfather." Cameron closed the book with more force than necessary. "Knew him?" "According to family legend, she broke his heart. My grandfather was supposed to marry someone from a respectable family, but he fell in love with some shopkeeper's daughter. When his parents forbade the match, she disappeared. Ran off and married someone else. My grandfather was devastated. He never really recovered, even though he eventually married my grandmother to please his family." Isabella felt defensive of the grandmother she'd loved. "Maybe there's more to the story than you know. People don't just run off for no reason. Don't they?" Cameron's voice was bitter. "Seems to run in your family. Trapping sterling men into unwanted situations. That's not fair and you know it," Isabella shot back, standing to face him. "You're so determined to hate me that you're twisting everything to fit your narrative." "I didn't trap you, Cameron. Your grandfather's dying wish trapped us both." They stood close now, anger crackling between them like electricity. Isabella could see the pulse beating in Cameron's throat, the way his hands clenched and unclenched at his sides. Despite her anger, she felt that same unwanted attraction from last night, her body responding to his presence in ways her mind refused to acknowledge. "Why didn't you tell me?" Cameron demanded. "When your father arranged this marriage, why didn't anyone mention the connection between our families?" "I didn't know there was one. I knew my grandmother was Grace Whitmore before she married, but she never mentioned any Sterlings. She gave me a locket before she died, but I didn't understand what it meant until last night." "A locket?" Cameron's eyes sharpened with interest. Isabella touched the chain around her neck instinctively, then regretted the gesture when Cameron's gaze followed her movement. "It has old photographs inside. A young woman who looks like me and a man in military uniform. I think they might be our grandparents." "Show me." It wasn't a request. Isabella's fingers fumbled with the clasp, removing the locket and handing it to Cameron. He opened it carefully, studying the faded photographs. She watched emotions play across his face: recognition, pain, confusion. "That's my grandfather," he said finally, his voice rough. "I've seen other photos of him from that era. And the woman does look like you." He glanced up, his eyes searching her face as if seeing her for the first time. "Remarkably like you." Before Isabella could respond, footsteps echoed in the hallway. Martha appeared, her usual composure slightly ruffled. "Mr. Cameron, I'm sorry to interrupt, but you have a visitor. Miss Sophia Bennet is in the drawing room. She says it's urgent." Cameron's expression closed off immediately. He handed the locket back to Isabella without meeting her eyes. "I have to deal with this. We'll discuss this family connection later." "Who's Sophia Bennet?" Isabella asked, though something in Cameron's reaction made her dread the answer. "Someone from my past," Cameron said curtly. "Stay here. This doesn't concern you." He left before Isabella could argue. She stood alone in the library, the locket warm in her palm, feeling more confused than ever. Who was Sophia Bennett, and why did her arrival make Cameron look so shaken? Isabella's curiosity won over caution. She followed quietly, staying far enough behind that Cameron wouldn't notice. She heard voices from the drawing room, a woman's laugh, light and familiar in a way that made Isabella's stomach clench. She positioned herself near the partially open door, hidden but able to hear clearly. "Cameron, darling, you look exhausted." The woman's voice was smooth, cultured, with an underlying intimacy that spoke of history. "Marriage clearly doesn't agree with you. What are you doing here, Sophia?" Cameron's voice was weary. "I heard about your wedding. Congratulations, by the way, though I have to say I'm surprised. When we ended things 2 years ago, you swore you'd never marry. Things change. My grandfather is dying, and he wanted to see me settled. So you married some nobody to please him? That's not like you, Cameron. You've always done exactly what you wanted, consequences be damned." There was a pause, then Cameron spoke quietly. "She's not a nobody. Her name is Isabella Morgan." Sophia laughed, the sound sharp. "Morgan? As in the Morgan Industries that's been hemorrhaging money for years?" "Oh, Cameron. You married her out of pity? Or did her father offer you such a good business deal that you couldn't resist?" "Enough, Sophia. My marriage is none of your business. You gave up any right to comment on my life when you walked away. I walked away because you wouldn't commit. You said marriage was a trap, that you'd never let anyone tie you down. And now, 2 years later, you're married to some desperate girl whose father probably threw her at you. How does that make sense?" Isabella had heard enough. She pushed the door open fully, stepping into the room with her head high despite her racing heart. Both Cameron and Sophia turned to stare at her. Sophia was beautiful, Isabella had to admit. Tall and elegant, with honey blonde hair styled in perfect waves, wearing a designer dress that probably cost more than Isabella's entire wardrobe. Her blue eyes widened in surprise, then narrowed with calculation as she assessed Isabella from head to toe. "I see the desperate girl has arrived," Sophia said with false sweetness. "I'm Sophia Bennett, an old friend of Cameron's. And you must be the new Mrs. Sterling." "Isabella," she said firmly, moving to stand beside Cameron. "And I'm not desperate. I'm his wife." Cameron looked at her with surprise, then something that might have been approval. Without thinking, Isabella reached for his hand. After a moment's hesitation, Cameron's fingers closed around hers, his grip warm and firm. Sophia's smile became brittle. "How charming. Young love. Was there something specific you needed, Sophia?" Cameron asked, his tone making it clear the visit was over. "Or did you come just to stir up trouble?" "Actually, I came with a business proposition. Bennett Enterprises is interested in partnering with Sterling Vineyards on the new export deal. We could make a fortune together, Cameron. Just like old times." "I'll have my people contact yours to discuss details," Cameron said formally. "But now, if you'll excuse us, Isabella and I were in the middle of something important." Sophia's expression flickered with annoyance, but she maintained her composure. "Of course. I'll see myself out. It was interesting to meet you, Isabella. I'm sure we'll be seeing more of each other. Cameron and I have so much history, after all." After Sophia left, Cameron released Isabella's hand abruptly, as if he'd only just realized he was holding it. The warmth of his touch lingered on her skin. "You didn't have to do that," he said quietly. She was being rude. "I wasn't going to stand in the hallway and let her insult me." Cameron studied her, his expression unreadable. "She was my fiancée. 2 years ago, I asked her to marry me, and she said no. Said I was too focused on business, too emotionally closed off. She wanted someone who could give her romance and passion, not just security. Isabella absorbed this information, understanding more about Cameron's coldness now. She hurt you. She was honest, Cameron corrected. And she was right. I'm not capable of being what she wanted. I'm not capable of being what any woman wants. That's not true. Isn't it? Cameron's voice was harsh. I've proven it already, haven't I? You're my wife, and I can't even share a room with you. I look at you and all I feel is trapped. The words hurt, but Isabella saw past them now to the pain underneath. Cameron wasn't just cold, he was afraid. Afraid of being hurt again, afraid of failing, afraid of letting anyone close enough to matter. Then maybe, Isabella said softly, we need to stop pretending this marriage is a trap and start figuring out what it could actually be. The days following Sophia's visit brought an unexpected shift in the Sterling household. Cameron didn't suddenly become warm or affectionate, but the wall between them developed cracks. He began joining Isabella for dinner, their conversations cautious but gradually more personal. They discussed books, the vineyard, even childhood memories, carefully avoiding the dangerous topics of their marriage or their grandparents' past. Isabella spent her days exploring the estate and researching her grandmother's history. Martha, sensing the changing dynamics, began warming to her as well, sharing stories about the Sterling family and the estate's history. But it was what Martha didn't say that interested Isabella most. Whenever Isabella mentioned Thomas Sterling or the 1940s, Martha would change the subject with practiced ease. One afternoon, Isabella was walking through the vineyard when she saw Cameron working alongside his employees, inspecting the grapevines with intense focus. He'd removed his shirt in the afternoon heat, and Isabella found herself staring at the muscles of his back, the way sunlight caught the sheen of sweat on his skin. When he turned and caught her watching, she felt heat flood her cheeks. Enjoying the view? Cameron called out, a hint of amusement in his voice that she'd never heard before. Just taking a walk, Isabella replied, trying to sound casual despite her embarrassment. I didn't mean to disturb you. Cameron said something to his foreman, then walked toward her, grabbing his shirt but not putting it on. You're not disturbing anything. Actually, I wanted to talk to you about something. Isabella's heart rate increased as he approached. Over the past week, these moments of proximity had become both easier and more difficult. Easier because she was growing accustomed to him, but harder because the attraction she felt was becoming impossible to ignore. My grandfather wants to meet you, Cameron said. He's been asking about you since the wedding, but his health hasn't permitted visitors. The doctors say he's having a good day today, so I thought we could visit him this evening. I'd like that, Isabella said sincerely. She'd been curious about Thomas Sterling, the man whose dying wish had created this complicated marriage, the man who had loved her grandmother decades ago. That evening, they drove to a private care facility nestled in the hills. Thomas Sterling's suite was more like a luxury apartment than a hospital room, filled with photographs and personal belongings. The old man himself sat in a wheelchair by the window, wrapped in blankets despite the warm evening. He must have been handsome once. Isabella could see Cameron in the shape of his face, the set of his shoulders. But illness had diminished him, leaving behind a frail shell. Grandfather, Cameron said gently, kneeling beside the wheelchair. I've brought Isabella to meet you. Thomas Sterling's watery eyes focused on Isabella, and she saw them widen with shock. His trembling hand reached out, and she took it instinctively, feeling the papery softness of aged skin. Grace, he whispered, his voice cracking with emotion. Grace, you came back. Isabella felt Cameron tense beside her. Grandfather, this is Isabella, my wife. Grace's granddaughter. But Thomas wasn't listening. Tears streamed down his weathered cheeks as he held Isabella's hand with surprising strength. I waited for you. You said you'd come back, but you never did. Why did you leave me, Grace? Why? Isabella's throat tightened with emotion. She glanced at Cameron, who looked stricken, then back at the old man. Mr. Sterling, I'm not Grace. But I'm her granddaughter, and I need to understand what happened between you two. Recognition slowly returned to Thomas's eyes. He blinked, studied Isabella's face more carefully, and released a shaky breath. Not Grace. But so much like her. Same eyes, same face, same gentle voice. He turned to Cameron. You married Grace's granddaughter? How is this possible? I didn't know about the connection when we married, Cameron explained. Isabella's father arranged the marriage, and neither of us knew about the history between our families. Thomas began to laugh, a weak but genuine sound. Fate. After all these years, fate brought our families together. Grace would have loved this irony. His expression turned sad. Is she gone? My Grace? Yes, Isabella said softly. She passed away 3 years ago. But before she died, she gave me this. Isabella removed the locket from around her neck and opened it, showing Thomas the photographs. The old man's hands shook as he took the locket, staring at the images with tears flowing freely now. She kept it. All these years, she kept our photographs. I gave this to her the night before I shipped out to Europe. I was so young, so foolish, thinking I could defy my parents and marry her when I returned from the war. What happened? Isabella asked gently. Why didn't you? Thomas was quiet for so long that Isabella thought he wouldn't answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was heavy with decades of regret. My father happened. When I was overseas, he went to Grace and told her I had died. Showed her a forged telegram and everything. She was heartbroken, devastated. She had no reason not to believe him. Cameron made a sound of shock and anger. He lied to her. Your own father told her you were dead. He wanted me to marry Evelyn Thornton, from a wealthy family. He saw Grace as a threat to his plans. So he eliminated her from my life. Thomas's voice shook with old anger. When I came home from the war, I went straight to Grace's house. But her father told me she'd married someone else and moved away. Wouldn't tell me where. Said she wanted nothing to do with me, that she'd been courting Henry Morgan while I was gone. Isabella felt tears on her own cheeks now. She never knew you were alive. And you never knew she'd been lied to. I found out the truth years later, after my father died. He confessed everything on his deathbed, thinking I'd forgive him because he'd done it for the family. But by then, Grace had been married for years, had children. I couldn't destroy her life by revealing the truth. So I married Evelyn as my father wanted, but I never loved her. I thought about Grace every day of my life. Cameron looked devastated. You married grandmother knowing you loved someone else? You gave up your whole life because of father's lies? I gave up my happiness, Thomas corrected. But I built this vineyard, raised your father, and eventually you. It wasn't the life I wanted, but it had meaning. He looked at Isabella and Cameron together. But now, seeing you two, Grace's granddaughter married to my grandson, I wonder if fate is giving us all a second chance. It's not the same, grandfather, Cameron said quietly. Isabella and I, we're not in love. This marriage is just an arrangement. Is it? Thomas asked, his sharp eyes moving between them. I see the way you look at her when you think no one's watching, Cameron. The same way I used to look at Grace. And Isabella, you watch him too, with hope in your eyes despite the walls he's built around himself. Isabella felt exposed, vulnerable. Was it that obvious? Had everyone noticed the feelings she'd been trying to suppress? Tell me something, Thomas continued, addressing Cameron. Why did you really agree to marry? Not just for me, not just for business. What was the real reason? Cameron was silent, his jaw clenched. Finally, he said, when I met Isabella at that first meeting her father arranged, something about her made me feel less alone. Just for a moment. I told myself it was nothing, that the arrangement made logical sense. But the truth is, I wanted an excuse to keep her in my life, even if I was too damaged to admit why. Isabella's breath caught. Cameron had never said anything like this before. He wouldn't look at her, his gaze fixed on his grandfather, but she could see the tension in his body, the vulnerability in his admission. "And you, Isabella?" Thomas asked. "Why did you agree? Just to save your family?" Isabella thought about lying, about giving the easy answer. But Thomas deserved honesty, and maybe so did Cameron. "At first, yes, it was for my family. But when I met Cameron, I saw past the cold exterior to someone who was hurting. Someone who needed to be seen and accepted, not for his money or name, but for who he really was. I thought maybe I could be the person who saw him." "And can you?" Thomas pressed. "Can you see him, even when he pushes you away?" "Yes," Isabella said firmly, finally looking at Cameron. "I see a man who's been hurt and who's afraid to be hurt again. A man who pours his passion into his vineyard because it's safer than pouring it into relationships. A man who married me because his grandfather asked, but who could learn to be happy if he'd let himself." Cameron stared at her, something raw and unguarded in his expression. The room felt charged with emotion, with possibilities neither of them had dared to voice before. Thomas smiled, satisfied. "Then I can die in peace, knowing I did one thing right. I brought you two together. What you do with this second chance is up to you, but don't waste it the way Grace and I wasted ours. Life is too short for pride and fear." The old man was clearly exhausted. Cameron helped him back to bed, and they said their goodbyes. As they drove home through the darkening hills, neither spoke. The silence wasn't uncomfortable, but rather filled with too many thoughts, too many feelings to put into words. Back at the estate, Cameron walked Isabella to her room, the guest room she still occupied after 2 weeks of marriage. They stood in the doorway, the space between them feeling both vast and negligible. "Did you mean what you said?" Cameron asked quietly. "About seeing me?" "Every word," Isabella replied. "Did you mean what you said about wanting an excuse to keep me in your life?" Cameron stepped closer, his hand coming up to cup her cheek. The touch was gentle, almost reverent, so different from the angry contact of their wedding night. "I've been a fool, Isabella. I was so afraid of being hurt again, so convinced that no one could want me for anything but my money or name, that I couldn't see what was right in front of me." "What's in front of you?" Isabella whispered, her heart pounding. "Someone brave and kind. Someone who sees the worst of me and doesn't run away. Someone who makes me want to be better than the bitter, closed-off person I've become." His thumb traced her cheekbone. "Someone I'm terrified of loving because losing her would destroy me." Isabella leaned into his touch, covering his hand with hers. "You won't lose me, Cameron. I'm not Sophia. I'm not going anywhere. How can you promise that? You barely know me." "I know enough. I know you work alongside your employees instead of above them. I know you visit your grandfather every week even though it breaks your heart to see him declining. I know you play the piano late at night when you think everyone's asleep, beautiful sad songs that make me want to cry. I know you're capable of so much more than you let yourself feel." Cameron's eyes widened. "You've heard me playing? My room is above the music room. The sound carries. It's beautiful, Cameron. You're beautiful, even when you're trying so hard not to be." He kissed her then, soft and tentative at first, as if he was afraid she might disappear. Isabella wrapped her arms around his neck, kissing him back with all the emotion she'd been holding inside. The kiss deepened, became more urgent, weeks of tension and longing pouring out between them. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Cameron rested his forehead against hers. "I don't know how to do this. I don't know how to be a real husband, how to let someone in." "Then we'll figure it out together," Isabella said. "No more separate rooms. No more pretending we're strangers. We start over, right now, as husband and wife who actually want to be married. I want that, Cameron admitted, his voice rough with emotion. God help me, I want that more than anything. He took her hand and led her down the hall, not to the guest room, but to the master bedroom where their marriage had begun so disastrously. This time, when they entered, it felt different. This time, they entered together. The next morning, Isabella woke wrapped in Cameron's arms, sunshine streaming through the windows. He was already awake, watching her with an expression so tender it made her chest ache. "Good morning, wife," he said softly. "Good morning, husband," she replied, smiling. They spent the morning in bed, talking about everything they'd kept hidden. Cameron told her about Sophia, about how her rejection had convinced him he was fundamentally unlovable. Isabella told him about the pressure from her father, about her own dreams she'd set aside for her family's sake. "You wanted to be an artist," Cameron said, playing with her hair. "Why didn't you tell me? It seemed selfish when my family was losing everything." "It's not selfish to have dreams. What if we converted one of the empty rooms into a studio for you? You could paint again, take classes if you want." Isabella's eyes filled with tears. "You'd do that for me?" "I'd do anything for you," Cameron said simply. "I'm just sorry it took me so long to realize it." Later that day, Cameron called a family meeting with his lawyers and Isabella's father. James Morgan arrived looking nervous, clearly expecting bad news. "Mr. Morgan," Cameron said formally. "When we arranged this marriage, it was a business transaction. But things have changed. Isabella and I have decided to make this a real marriage, which means the terms need to change." James paled. "Changed how?" "The investment in Morgan Industries will continue, but as a legitimate business partnership, not as payment for Isabella. She's my wife, not a commodity. Additionally, I'm establishing a trust fund in Isabella's name so she has financial independence regardless of our marriage. She should have had that from the beginning." Isabella squeezed Cameron's hand under the table, overwhelmed by his gesture. Her father looked relieved and somewhat ashamed. "I'm sorry," James said quietly. "I was desperate, and I treated my daughter like a bargaining chip. Isabella, can you forgive me?" "I already have, Dad," Isabella said. "But from now on, I make my own choices about my life." As autumn deepened into winter, Isabella and Cameron built their life together. The estate transformed from a lonely museum into a home filled with laughter and music. Isabella set up her art studio and began painting again, her canvases capturing the beauty of the vineyard through the seasons. Cameron taught her about winemaking, and she taught him how to be vulnerable, how to laugh, how to love without fear. They visited Thomas regularly, and the old man's health seemed to improve just from seeing their happiness. On one visit, he gave Isabella a sealed envelope. "Grace sent this to me 20 years ago," Thomas explained. "After my father died and I tried to contact her. She forgave me for what happened, explained everything from her perspective. I want you to have it, to understand how much she loved me, even though circumstances kept us apart." Isabella read the letter that night, tears streaming down her face. Her grandmother wrote about the devastation of believing Thomas was dead, about marrying Henry Morgan on the rebound, trying to fill the void. But she also wrote about learning to love Henry in a different way, about not regretting her children and grandchildren even though Thomas remained her first love. She forgave fate, Isabella told Cameron. She said life takes us on unexpected journeys, and sometimes the detours lead us exactly where we need to be. "Like us," Cameron said, pulling her close. "Like us," Isabella agreed. Sophia Bennett appeared one more time, at a charity gala where Cameron and Isabella were the guests of honor. She approached them with her usual confidence, but faltered when she saw the way Cameron looked at Isabella, the way their hands were intertwined. "You're really happy," Sophia said, sounding genuinely surprised. "I didn't think you were capable of it, Cameron." "I wasn't," Cameron replied. "Not until Isabella showed me how." Sophia studied them both, then smiled sadly. I'm glad. Truly. I wasn't right for you, but she clearly is. Take care of him, Isabella. Under all that ice is a heart worth having. I know, Isabella said. And I will. When spring arrived, bringing new life to the vineyard, Thomas Sterling passed away peacefully in his sleep. At the funeral, Isabella and Cameron stood together, grieving but also grateful. Thomas had given them the push they needed to find each other, to heal old wounds and create new possibilities. He was right, Cameron said as they stood over his grandfather's grave. Fate did give us a second chance. Grace and Thomas couldn't be together, but we can. We won't waste it. Never, Isabella promised. A year after their wedding, Isabella discovered she was pregnant. Cameron's joy was uncontainable, his protective instincts immediately kicking in. He fussed over her constantly, making her rest, bringing her tea, rubbing her feet when they swelled. You're going to be an amazing father, Isabella told him one evening as they sat on their balcony, watching the sunset paint the vineyard gold. I'm terrified I'll mess it up, Cameron admitted. You won't. You'll love our child the way you love me, completely, protectively, with everything you have. Their son was born in early winter, perfect and healthy. They named him Thomas Henry Sterling, honoring both their grandfathers, the men whose love story had brought them together across generations. As Isabella held their son, with Cameron's arms around them both, she thought about her grandmother's letter, about fate and second chances, about how the most unexpected journeys sometimes lead to the most beautiful destinations. Thank you, Cameron whispered into her hair. For what? For not giving up on me. For seeing past the walls I built. For teaching me that being loved doesn't mean being trapped, it means being free. Isabella turned to kiss him, their son sleeping peacefully between them. Thank you for letting me in. For becoming the man I always knew you could be. Outside, snow began to fall over the vineyard, blanketing everything in white. Inside, the Sterling family was warm, complete, and finally, after generations of broken hearts and missed chances, truly happy. The hidden secret that brought Cameron to his knees wasn't just the locket or the family connection. It was the truth that love, real love, requires courage. The courage to be vulnerable, to forgive, to trust, and to fight for something more than pride or protection. Isabella had possessed that courage from the beginning, and in the end, she taught Cameron to find it within himself. Their story, born from rejection and pain, transformed into something neither could have imagined, a love that healed old wounds and created new legacies. Grace and Thomas's love story finally found its happy ending, not in their own lives, but in the lives of their grandchildren who refused to let fear win. And every evening, as Cameron played piano in the music room with Isabella painting nearby and their son sleeping upstairs, the Sterling estate finally became what it was always meant to be, not a museum of lost dreams, but a home filled with love, laughter, and second chances fulfilled.